Welcome to Unit 3. This is retelling narrative stories. And it's in your seminar workbook on page 31, so feel free to turn there. And you will see that the poster we have is the story sequence chart. There's an interesting little story about how this Unit 3 story sequence chart came to be a part of the syllabus. It actually predates almost everything else in this program. Dr. Webster, before he was Dr. Webster, was Mr. Webster teaching grade 5 in Vancouver, trying to save money so he could go off and get his PhD. Now, I don't know how you save money by teaching 5th grade, but he was over at Mrs. Ingham's house for Thanksgiving, and he saw on her coffee table a little pile of student stories. And so he started reading these stories, and he started to feel kind of bad because he realized that these stories, which Mrs. Ingham's grade 1 students were writing, were actually superior to most of what any of his grade 5 students could do. And so he said, "Aunt Gertrude, how do you get your grade 1s to write such good stories?" And that's when she explained to him in a very simple way. She just penciled it out on a paper napkin, the story sequence chart that we have with the characters and the setting and the conflict and the problem and the climax and the resolution. And so Webster took that and he thought, okay, now my grade 5s do quite well writing their science reports, their science experiment reports, because there's a structure to it. The first section is your hypothesis materials, the second section is your process, and the third section is the outcome of the experiment and the conclusion. And everybody knows what to do because there's a structure. So he took Mrs. Ingham's little story sequence chart and put it into that 3-part model that his grade 5s were familiar with from writing up their science experiments. And that was the very beginning of Unit 3, before there were any other units. And so it's just kind of interesting to see. And of course, Mrs. Ingham's clarity on things permeates everything that we do here now. So I just thought you might like to know that. Now, I will confess that this is where some people have a little bit of a hard time. They get stuck here because Unit 2 is so nice and friendly and comfortable, and all you have to do is pick keywords from each sentence and write them down and put them into sentences. Unit 3 is different, and the biggest difference is that we are not going to be looking on the page for the keywords. We're going to be pulling the keywords out of our mind, out of our brain. So here's the image, if you can get this image. Here's a story. This story can be any length. It could be a 2-page Greek myth. It could be a 10-page O. Henry story. It could be a half-page Aesop fable. It could be a novel. It could be a movie. It could be a country western song in some cases, right? It's a story. Any length. You take the story and you put it into the brain, right? You put the story in your mind by reading it. Read it again if you need to. Get it in the brain. Then we're going to use this tool, the story sequence chart, to pull the story out of the brain. So this is a big shift. In Unit 2, we're looking for the keywords on the paper. In Unit 3, we're moving over to the inventive creative activity of pulling the keywords from the brain. And that's the biggest shift, and that's where people have a little bit of a problem because it's just not so nice and clean and mechanically easy. I'm going to try and show you how this story sequence chart works, many different ways to use it. We're going to do a whole story together, and then you get to do one on your own. So I think with all that practice and perspective, you'll be okay. But if you can just remember that one idea, the keywords are not coming from the page. The story goes in, and then the story comes out, and this is the tool that we use to create that. Good? All right. You see the story sequence chart on page 31. I'm going to build it up on the board here with you. This is a 3-paragraph model. And it means that you'll have whatever stylistic techniques you've taught so far in each of the 3 paragraphs. And one of the things we want to try and help students gain in this unit is the idea that a paragraph has a purpose. So we're going to define the purpose of each paragraph. And the first paragraph is going to be the characters, not necessarily all of them, but at least some of them, and a setting. So characters and setting. That's usually always what you get. They call it in more advanced vocabulary the exposition, right? So you're getting the setup for the story. In the beginning there was A who was somewhere, and this was the situation, right? Without some characters to do something, it's pretty hard to have a story of any sort. The second paragraph, or second section, is what we would call the conflict, or perhaps the problem. Problem, conflict, that's what kind of makes the story interesting. And this is one of the reasons why some sweet little girls write horrifically dull stories. I don't know if you've ever read any of these, but they'll start a story and they'll have the characters go here and do this, and go here and do that, and then go over here and do this, and then they'll go over here and do that. And they'll have a nice long conversation about something, and then she'll get tired and write the end. And you read it, and it's kind of dull, because you've ended up with 16 pages of characters and setting. And the problem, of course, is they're sweet little girls, and so they don't like conflict or problem. They're sweet. So, the good news is, they are eventually going to grow up into teenage girls who I think are much happier to cause problems. But the idea here is that we will be able to provide them with the problem, with the conflict. So we're going to give them a story that will work as a story, but they don't have to be mean and nasty and create a problem themselves. You see? Now, I've met some kids, usually boys, who have the opposite thing going on here. They really don't like to have to describe stuff. They just like action. So their stories will start out, once upon a time, bombs exploded, bits of flesh flew everywhere, blood spurted in the streets, you know. And you're thinking, well, that's all fine and good. But where in time and space are we, and who just died, you know? They love the action. So this kind of enforces on them to give us a little setup so we can get a picture of what's happening. And then sometimes they like to have really lots of problems too, so that's good. But without a problem, you don't have much of a story. Third section, of course, if you have a problem, what would come here? Resolution. And you usually have that high point, that climax, that highest point, top of it, beginning of the end, light at the end of the tunnel, turning of the tide. And really, any story you can think of basically has to have these 3 parts, or it's not really a story. Sometimes you get a story with lots and lots of problems and subplots and sub-issues, but you can usually always boil it down to one thing. And of course, we're going to be working with teaching students and using probably short stories to begin with, so that it should be fairly simple. Again, Aesop fables work very nice. Now, for some kids, that might be enough. You could just say, write one paragraph about the character and setting, another about the conflict problem, another about the climax resolution, go. Summarize the story, retell the story. Others of us are going to need a little more help. We have to think of these things. And the trick there then would be having some questions. So if you want to talk about the characters, what question would you ask? Okay, who is in the story? And you'd want to add a little bit of detail. Who's in the story? You know, what is that person like? What is their situation? What is their circumstance? What is their character? What is their personality? Right? And build that up a little bit. And then setting, we usually think of what? The where and the when. And of course, these where and when describing the scene helps the reader get an image. You know, if you ask kids who are their favorite authors, they'll very often say people like J.K. Rowling or Lemony Snicket or C.S. Lewis, Tolkien if they're older. They'll name authors who are very good at painting pictures with words. And so part of our goal in teaching Unit 3 is to help them understand how words create images. And images can create a mood or a feeling as well. Try a little thought experiment here with me. Pretend you're 10 years old and close your eyes and watch what happens when I say words. You ready? House, 2-story, green, white trim, chimney, smoke, beach, porch, sunset, seagulls. Okay, open your eyes. Now what happens with each word? The image gets bigger, more detailed, more vibrant. And all I did was say words. But that's the power of words on the imagination, you see? And that creates kind of a pleasant mood. I could create a different mood if I use different words. House, stone, crumbling, brambles, thicket, howling, wind, gate, slapping, right? So I'm always trying to help kids understand that when they write a descriptive thing, especially in a story, they are responsible for putting the image into the reader. You can't just say house and have the reader see the same house that you see. So that's kind of helpful, and a lot of the quality adjectives and ly words are going to help kids improve their ability. The dress-ups will help their ability to be more detailed in describing the circumstances and the situation and the people. Now, conflict problem. The big question here is, what? What is the problem? And I've noticed that most problems exist because there's some type of want or need. We want to find that treasure. We need to escape these bad guys. We want to climb that mountain. We need to get rid of this blasted little magic ring. Right? Sometimes you can create a whole series of books over one seemingly simple little problem. Right? Then you want to develop the plot a little bit. And so the follow-up questions, what do the characters think? What do they say? What do they do? And these things can kind of be mixed up. They're not necessarily in an order here because you might find out what they're thinking because of what they say. Or in some cases, what they say is what they actually do to solve their problem. And so these can be all mixed up. But if kids are having difficulty developing that plot, they should just ask the question, what did they think? What did they say? What did they do? What else did they think? What else did they say? What else did they do? What else did they think, say, or do? And hopefully they can build that up. Climax here, of course, the question is, how is the problem solved? Right? What happens to cause the problem to be solved, the want or need to be eliminated? And sometimes stories will solve a problem not in the way the reader is expecting, right? The story of Romeo and Juliet is a very good one because it follows, well, I don't know if it's a good story, but it follows the story sequence chart perfectly. Romeo and Juliet, who are a little bit young, somewhat headstrong, have a bit of an issue with parental authority, find themselves in a situation when and where their families are fighting, feuding, hating, and killing each other for no apparent reasons. Now that's not a problem. That's a situation. That's a setup. That's a circumstance. The problem occurs because they fall in love. That causes them to want or need to be together. But they cannot be together because their families are fighting, feuding, hating, and killing each other for no apparent reasons. So, one of them thinks of a pretty clever plan. Fake our death, and we'll run away and live happily ever after. Because I guess in those days you couldn't just run away and live happily ever after. You had to fake your death first, and then you could run away and live happily ever after. Then they talk a whole lot, almost the entire play. Then they do implement their plan. One of them fakes the death, and the other one thinks the death is real, and then kills themselves, and the other one wakes up and kills themselves, and they both die. That is the solution to their problem. They both die. Not the solution they were hoping for, but it did solve their immediate want or need to be together on earth. They may have other problems in the afterlife we don't know about, but the one we're dealing with is solved. And it's interesting, what do we call a story like that? A tragedy. We call it a tragedy because, the problem is not solved in the way they are hoping that it would be. If they successfully faked their death and ran away and lived happily ever after, then it would be a comedy. But it's a tragedy. And what's interesting is sometimes tragedies do a good job of doing what a story should do. Now, it's interesting. There's one more question we haven't addressed. Who, where, when, what, how? What's the last of the big six? Why? Why have stories? Why have this story? Interesting thing. I've asked this question of kids for a couple decades. And most children, and even some adults, will answer the question, why do we have stories? With an answer like, for entertainment, for enjoyment. One little boy even said, so you don't die of boredom. But that's kind of a relatively new answer in the history of the world. I think that's television generations. What would be the answer you might have got 100 years ago? To teach some kind of life lesson, some kind of wisdom, some kind of history, some kind of value, right? And so you don't necessarily have to explain it and make it explicit, but it's always good to ask the question, what is the message here? What is the message? Now, sometimes it's very explicit, and you almost get a little epilogue statement, right? And the tortoise realized, slow and steady wins the race. You get this little moralizing. Romeo and Juliet does that very precisely, because the last scene, the priest gives a great long soliloquy on why fighting, feuding, hating, killing other people for no apparent reasons is likely to backfire, and you're only going to end up hurting yourself, which is what happened to you because your kids are dead, so ha-ha. So then there's reconciliation, there's healing at the end, but there is kind of an explicit. Some books, it's kind of hidden, right? Has anyone read Wuthering Heights? What does that mean? I don't know. It must mean something. It's the kind of book that gives college professors a job, right? To help you figure that out. But it's not explicit. So whether the kids tell, message and epilogue, or what happened after the characters, that doesn't really matter a lot to me. But I always want them to think about, what does this story teach, if anything? So that's the story sequence chart. You see a nice version of it there on page 31. And what we're going to do is we're going to skip ahead past some of this content and the student samples. We'll revisit these later. And go right on over to page 39, where you will see an outline similar to this, along with an Aesop fable, which I think you're probably familiar with, The Fox and the Crow. And so we're going to just do this process. Take this story, The Fox and the Crow, put it into the brain, and then use the story sequence chart here to pull it out of the brain and show you kind of how I would do this with kids, especially like a first lesson. We'll do it together. And then we'll go revisit some of the student samples and some of the ways to use the story sequence chart. So let's jump in and just read the story. I'll read it out loud. You follow along with your eyes here. I'm sure you're familiar, but we'll just refresh. The Fox and the Crow. One morning, a plain black crow sat on a branch holding in her beak a piece of cheese. Along came a fox who had smelled the cheese. The fox came and stood under the tree, saying politely to the crow, "Good morning, my friend. My, how well you are looking today." The crow was very pleased at this, but of course she could not reply because of the cheese she held in her mouth. "Your eyes are the most beautiful I have seen," the fox went on, "and your feathers, how black and glossy they are." The crow was even more pleased, but still she said nothing. She just sat on her branch and swelled with pride. I have been told, he continued, how beautifully you sing, and I should like so much to hear you. Your voice could not possibly be so lovely as your feathers, but if it were, why, you would be the most wonderful bird in the world. Do sing just a few notes for me, won't you? This was too much for the crow. She opened her beak wide, cawed loudly, and dropped the cheese right into the mouth of the waiting fox. Thank you so much, said the fox, eating the cheese. Your song was very ugly, but your cheese was delicious. Perhaps next time you won't be so ready to believe everything you hear. With that, the fox laughed and trotted off into the woods. Okay, so you've probably seen that version or a shorter or longer. There's a great poetic version by Guy Wetmore Carroll called The Sycophantic Fox and the Gullible Raven, all in sophisticated poetry language. So we've got it in the brain. Now the task is to pull it out and plot it according to the story sequence chart in 3 sections. So let's go ahead and start asking some questions. Who's in the story? All right, we got a fox. All right, now what is the fox like? What's his personality? He's sly, as foxes usually are. And what's his situation, his condition? Hungry. He's a sly but hungry fox. All right. Okay, who else do we have in this story? Okay, crow. Now, what is the crow like? What's the crow's personality? Say again? Okay, she's proud, prideful. She's also a little bit naive. Bad combination. All right. Now, where is this story happening?
Forest.
All right. In a tree, in a forest. Now, I might say, where would a crow get cheese in a forest? And you might have to think of something. Near a farmhouse. Not too far from the Tillamook cheese factory. Near a campground, right? Okay, so we'll put near a farmhouse. And just adding one little detail actually expands the picture, doesn't it? Yeah. When is this story happening?
Morning.
Okay, it says morning. We don't really know much. It could be a bright, crisp, sunny Phoenix in February kind of morning, or it could be a cloudy, drizzly Portland all year round kind of day. What do you like? What would enhance our story?
Autumn.
Probably the crisp, bright, because then the fox could say something like, oh, how that morning sun glistens off those feathers, something like that. All right, so we'll have it be a bright and crisp morning. Now, we're going to have to squeeze in one more thing here because there's actually one more thing in the setup that makes the whole story possible. What's that?
Cheese.
The cheese. Without the cheese, there's no story. And I like to suggest, too, that when you talk to kids about setting, try and expand the word from just time and place, which is what we usually think of, more to what's the setup, what's the situation, what are all the elements that are necessary for that story to occur, right? And so you've got then the cheese. So we'll add that in. Now, what kind of cheese was it? It was pepper jack. All right. Pepper jack cheese. And where was the cheese in the picture? In the crow's beak. All right. So, 3 words per line. It looks the same. We're following the same format. But we weren't looking in the story for the words so much as we're looking in our mind for the words. Now, some of them may be the same, but the activity is different. Do you see? Do we have enough words for a paragraph? Yeah, I think so. Now, some little guys are going to do it kind of like this. Once there was a sly and hungry fox who spotted a prideful and naive crow as she sat in a tree in the forest near a farmhouse. It was a bright, crisp morning. She tightly held pepper jack cheese in her beak because she stole it from the garbage can at the farmhouse. End of paragraph. Some kids will try to do those words plus whatever style techniques are on the checklist in as few words as possible. Is that okay? Yes, it's actually a skill called conciseness, right? It's valued in the business world. So, that's fine. Now, other kids, going to start out as the sun peeped over the horizon, illuminating the forest to a translucent, almost ethereal green. A fox emerged from his lair and, clearing the sleep out of his eyes, whiffed the air, detecting the scent, the faintest scent of Limburger cheese, his favorite, right? And she'll give you 2 pages just to get the fox to where the crow is. Is that okay? Absolutely. Either one is okay with me. So I don't mind if the kids write it very businesslike, very concise, practice the techniques, good, we're done. But it also gives plenty of opportunity for creativity as well. Right? All right, now, what is the problem? What is the problem? All right, Fox wants the cheese. He doesn't just want the cheese, he craves the cheese. He's a cheese-craving fox. All right, so he thinks of a plan. What's he going to do? Yes, he's going to trick, flatter, distract. So he talks. That's his method. What does he say? He says to the crow, quote, "Oh, you are so beautiful. You have beautiful eyes. You have lovely feathers. And where, pray tell, did you get that stunning pedicure?" Now, what is the crow's reaction here? She's pleased. She's feeling a little... She's blushing. Like that. Blushing crow. With a little blush. But she's got that problem. What's the problem? She can't respond and say, "Well, thank you, dear sir. How true." So she remains silent. Okay. Then, we'll squeeze in a 4 there. The fox puts in his kind of final statement that actually is the action that effects the change he wants. What does he do? Yes, he begs. He begs, "Oh, sing one note, and my life will be complete." So that gets us up to the moment at which everything changes, right? Okay. The climax occurs when the crow sings. Yeah, crows don't sing though. They caw, they screech. She lets out a squawk. How do you spell squawk? SQUAWK? Boy, that's an awkward word. Squawk. Now let's use an advanced technique just for fun. A simile. She lets out a squawk like worst thing you could imagine. Awfulest sound. Well, it's kind of cliche. Yeah, I'm thinking more awful, like a saxophone. A broken soprano saxophone. A B flat on a broken soprano saxophone. That is the worst you could come up with. All right, so she lets out a squawk like a B flat on a broken soprano sax. Then things happen very quickly. What happens? Cheese falls.
Plummets.
Plummets. Chew, nice. Cheese plummets. Where?
Fox mouth.
Into the fox's mouth. And then he eats the cheese. Let's think of some strong verbs. He devours, gobbles. He gobbled the cheese. And then he kind of said, ha-ha, gloat, gobbled, gloated. Oh, we've got to get another G word and have alliteration, don't we? He gobbled, gloated, and
Grin.
galloped away.
Oh.
Galloped away. And as he left, he kind of said the message, the moral, which was what? Don't believe a hungry male. I'll tell anything to get your dinner. And then, one thing I love about Aesop fables is they kind of end a bit abruptly. Have you noticed that? They kind of end, and the reader is always kind of thinking, but what happened after that, right? And so that's a good thing. In this particular story, what are we kind of wondering about? Yeah, what was the crow's reaction here? Did the crow think, oh, this gullible vanity has got me again. I really need to take some self-improvement classes. Or did she get angry and fly after that fox and try to peck out his eyes in retribution? Or did she just say, wow, what happened to that cheese I had a minute ago? Yeah. I mean, it could be anything. So I like to encourage the students, especially in Aesop fables. They're particularly well suited. Tell one more thing that happened after the hare won the race, the tortoise won the race. Tell one more thing that happened after the fox went away. And that helps the kids get that sense of kind of wrapping it up. And I think the fables are written that way to kind of promote thinking a little bit. So, all right, so that's the method of creating the outline from the story sequence chart by pulling the words out of our mind. Now, if I said, everybody go write that story, I think you'd have a pretty easy time putting those words into sentences and retelling this fable, you know, and it would be different than the original. It would be more different from the original than the Unit 2 book list was different from that. See? So we're gradually building that creativity. But before I send you off to write the story, I would want to kind of help set you up for success with the stylistic techniques, right? So I would revisit whatever we've got and maybe add to the list of words. So just to show you how I might do this, turn to page 175. 175. And let's say that this is representing a list of LY words that we have on the wall. We've built up, we've got a nice list, and what I would like to do is kind of preview some of the words that are maybe guaranteed to work in the story. There's 3 parts to the story, and each part is going to have whatever dress-up techniques have been taught. So if you've taught ly adverb, each paragraph is going to have a minimum of 1, right? So you can kind of go through the story and say, all right, the fox saw the crow. The fox eyed the crow. How did he do that? Shout out a few ly words that might. Hungrily eyed the cheese. Deviously eyed that crow. Frantically approached. Cunningly smiled at her, right? The crow sat. How did the crow sit on the branch? She sat confidently. She sat proudly. She sat naively. She sat cheerfully. She sat righteously, unsuspectingly, right? The fox said, oh, that's great cheese you've got there. No, he didn't say that. The fox said, oh, you look so beautiful. How did he say that? Passionately, he said, "You are so beautiful." Deceivingly, he said, "You're so beautiful." Suspiciously, he said, "You look beautiful today." Cunningly, all right? The crow somethingly swelled with pride. Look at your list. If you can't think of one, scan the list. Say again? Rapidly, she swelled with pride. Foolishly, she swelled with pride. Impulsively, she swelled with pride. Naturally, she believed him. Then, of course, this would go well, wouldn't it? He somethingly gobbled. Greedily gobbled. Gleefully gloated and gratefully galloped away. Yes, you could go crazy with it, couldn't you? Yeah, so the idea then is that you would spend a bit of time, once you've got the outline, to preview the word list or add some words to your list that we're going to kind of set up the students to be able to easily put one in each paragraph. Do you see? If you have taught a strong verb, if you're that far along in the style syllabus, then this would be a good time to revisit the banned words list. Maybe revisit and add to it, if so. One of the good ones to get rid of is see or saw. So instead of he saw the crow, what could you write? Spotted, eyed, beheld. Say again? Glimpsed. Took a note of. Spied. All right, and you could go on with that for a while. What other verbs are likely to come up here? Said. Definitely said. He said, "You're so beautiful." What could you use instead of said in that context? Crooned. Coerced. Articulated. Pontificated. Flattered. Announced. Whispered. There's so many good options. Right, and you go on with that for a while. So you look for verbs. Here we've got 3 strong ones right there. Sometimes you might want to point out a weak verb and not necessarily make it a banned word where you're not allowed to use it, but say, how about sat? Instead of sat, what could you use? Okay. Perched. Clung. Say again? Gripped. Balanced. Lounged. Okay. Some words, of course, have more synonyms available than others, but even having 2 or 3 options is going to help the kids a lot. So you want to build these word lists. So that would be verb. If you've taught quality adjective, you might revisit the banned adjectives list. Now, what I have discovered is there's actually more verbs that you can replace easily than adjectives, because adjectives, there's just not as many synonyms. So you can get rid of the obvious ones like good, bad, big, cool, nice. But beyond that, it's a little tough. So a better way to help kids think of adjectives is to help them identify the nouns. So in this story, you've got a few nouns. You've got a something fox. What could you say about the fox?
Crafty.
Okay, a crafty fox. Or a mischievous fox.
Deceivingly.
What?
Deceivingly.
Well, I don't want an ly here. What I want is an adjective that you could put before the word fox. So the deceiving fox, or the deceitful fox, that would be a good one.
Famished.
Famished.
Finagling. Finagling famished fox.
The finagling famished fox. In the middle of the story, he becomes a very what fox?
Determined.
Determined, debonair, charming, focused, a very charismatic fox. And then at the end of the story, he becomes a very what? Content fox, boastful fox, flippant fox, arrogant fox, victorious fox. You see how adding a word is going to enhance the story there. So you can give them a nice long list of possible adjectives to go with the nouns. What other nouns do we have? Okay, let's go with crow. We've got the something crow. We've got prideful and naive. What else could we say? Gullible. Unsuspecting. Self-satisfied. In the end of the story, she becomes very what? Jaded crow. Very surprised, bitter, sorrowful, confused. All right. So if I had time and I had students, I'd build these lists up, but you kind of get the idea of how this would work, right? You've got the something tree. What could you say about the tree? Willow tree. The mighty tree. The dead tree. Yeah, you teach boys too, I can tell. The deciduous tree. That'll work right in with the science lesson. Cheese. What have you got for cheese? Yeah, you could have cube cheese or pungent cheese or odoriferous cheese or tasty cheese. Perfectly aged cheese. Don't underestimate the power here. The first time I taught this to a group of children, my daughter Genevieve was in the class. She was 10 years old, and her job every day was to make my lunch. And at that time, I still do, I like very spicy foods. And so every day for lunch, I would eat a jalapeno jack and turkey sandwich with extra Tabasco. And she made my lunch every day. So she knew this. So when we got to this part of the story, I said, what kind of cheese could it be? She goes, Dad, it could be jalapeno cheese like you eat. And then another kid in the class said, so then the fox would eat it and he wouldn't say, ha ha. He'd say, ah, and run into the woods to get a drink. Right? So we got some interesting endings there and titles to go with the endings, like spicy cheese disaster, or fox gets his due, or who was tricked. Right? Now, I'd told that story for years, and there's a sequel to that one. I had taught a seminar in Pasco, Washington, came back the next year and taught again, and there was a teacher who was in the previous year, and she said, oh, I got to tell you this. I went home and I taught, the spicy cheese story to my 7th graders, and I told them, or I taught the Fox and the Crow to my 7th graders, and I told them about your daughter's spicy cheese variation. And so a couple of them did that, but one boy wrote this ending. The fox dropped the cheese, the crow dropped the cheese, the fox gobbled it, said, ah, ran into the woods to get a drink, and the crow flew over to her secret stash of spicy cheese to pick up another chunk and wait for her next victim. It was the Hitchcock twist. So you never know where this whole process can go. And I call this kind of the Robin Hood style of teaching. Because in any group, in any family, anytime you get a bunch of kids together, there's going to be a spectrum of linguistic aptitude. Some kids just know a lot of words. They talk a lot, they read a lot, their parents read to them, they just have a lot of words. And other kids, sometimes even in the same family, just don't have all those words, right? And so with this method, you get as many words up on the board, up on the wall, as you can. and you get the words from the kids who know it, and then you give those words and make them available to the kids who don't. You got a little guy, he would never think of it himself in a million years, but he can put two and two together, right? And he can say, oh, that, and that, and he'll write a sentence like, you are so beautiful, the fox, the debonair fox mellifluously crooned. Cool. He wouldn't think of it in a million years, but he can put those things together, you see? So I call this the Robin Hood style of teaching. You steal from the rich, you give to the poor, but everybody benefits. Do you see? Now, an important question for you. Which is easier for students to do independently? Read the story, ask the questions, put the answers into the key words and create the outline, or to write the story once this has been done? Which is easier for most children? Writing the story. That is kind of a mechanical thing, and there's creativity and it's fun. Creating the outline is the harder part. It's the higher order, the analytical thinking. And so when you teach this to students, you need to model this part a little bit more. So what I would recommend is probably the first story you do it just like we did, plot the whole thing out and say, okay, everybody go write it. Then the second time maybe, you could just do that much and see if they can do this on their own. Or if you have a group where it's appropriate and productive to do so, you can put them in little groups of 2 or 3 and let them work on the story sequence chart in a little group of 2 or 3. And then maybe the third one, just do the first part together and let them do the rest. And then after 2 or 3 modelings like that, then you can say, okay, I think you got the hang of it. Here's the story. Everybody create the chart on your own. You see? So you want to wean them toward that independence. And if you're teaching young children or your own kids are struggling or you yourself are not sure how it's working, it's perfectly okay to do all of them together like this. Because as you do them together, you get confident, they get confident, and then pretty soon they'll start coming up with their own ideas. And usually second year goes much easier. Third year, the kids really understand this whole thing and they don't need much modeling at all. But it's always better to err on the side of doing more. Now, let's take a look back at the Unit 3 content, because there's a few things I like to point out here. First of all, if you would like to read the original Spicy Cheese story by my daughter Genevieve, it's on page 40, and that's the source of that kind of funny story with the jalapeno cheese there. But what I would like to draw your attention to is a little chart on page 32. Ways to use the story sequence chart. So turn to page 32. And there are several ways that this chart can be used. The first way could be used even in a kindergarten class, even with very young children, as a discussion tool. So you can put this story sequence chart up on the wall, and you read them a story, and you just verbally have a conversation, and this starts the process of them hearing and asking and answering questions to get the basic parts of the story out of their brain. So really, just as a discussion tool, even if you're teaching in kindergarten, first grade, long before kids are going to be actually writing that much, you can use it that way. And it's a very good way to start talking about literature. Another way to use it is as a straight summary. Now, a straight summary is essentially where you don't change anything, right? I think California standards had children should summarize a story. Well, they don't really want the kids to change anything. They just want them to tell the salient points, the main elements. Personally, I think that's a little boring, so I don't do it. I like to start with the kids that can write with this third point here, elaboration. I like to try to encourage small changes, right? For example, in the original, there was no mention of a B flat with a broken soprano sax, right? I kind of added that in because I thought it would be fun. That'd be an elaboration. Changing the cheese from being delicious cheese the fox is happy with to, habanero cheese that causes his mouth to burn. There's a beautiful balance to life when that happens. But that would be a change, an elaboration, right? So I like to try and encourage that right off because that gives the kids who have the opportunity, gives the kids who have the desire to be creative the opportunity to do so. But at the same time, it doesn't force anybody to have to think up something and have that blank brain and I can't think of anything problem. Another use, and I wouldn't do this the first or second time, but maybe the third time, or if it's your second or certainly by your third year, you want to play with this idea, and that is the variation. This is where you actually change the characters and the setting, but keep the problem. So you're essentially borrowing the plot, but changing the characters, right? Aesop's fables in general, myths work very well because fables and parables are kind of meant to be timeless, right? So rather than the boy who cried wolf, couldn't you have a girl, goatherd in Africa, who cried lion? Or maybe switch it and have the wolf who cried boy hunter, right? Or move it into a different universe and have the stormtrooper who cried Jedi, right? Or the hobbit who cried orc attack, right? Or move it into an historical period, the rebel soldier who cried Union attack, right? I even had a boy once, this was back not long after the 9/11 events of the last decade, who wrote, he was a 10-year-old boy, he did a variation on the boy who cried wolf called The President Who Cried Weapons of Mass Destruction. I thought, wow, that's pretty perceptive for a little kid to kind of hear what's going on in the world and make that connection with the theme in the story. So it works very nicely, and fables are good that way. And I think it helps kids realize that really there's no such thing as a new plot, really. I mean, the plots are limited in scope, and it's the circumstances that change, and so it's okay to do this. There's a couple samples in here. If you look at page 42, there's a very nice version by a grade 7 student. You probably know the story of the lion and the shepherd, where the lion gets a thorn in his paw and the shepherd comes and pulls it out, and then later that shepherd is arrested and going to be thrown to the lions, and the very lion that's supposed to eat him is the one that he saved. You know that story. Sometimes it's Androcles and the lion. That's that story here, but this student has changed it to a knight and a dragon, you see. And so the dragon is injured, and then the knight helps the dragon, and then later the dragon helps the knight. This is a very nice type of story. Character A helps character B. Now character A gets in trouble, and character B providentially is their salvation, whatnot. So you can peruse the student samples at your leisure, but I think it's very good to read them, especially read them compared to what grade you're teaching, so you can kind of have an expectation of what's reasonable. But, little caveat here. We picked good ones. We picked good students from good teachers who wrote good samples. So don't compare yourself with the samples and say, oh no, my child could never do that. I must be failing. No. There's always going to be a spectrum. And of course we would want to show, what's possible. And if there's some natural, small, goofy things that we left in because students do that, and that's realistic. Now, back on page 32, continuing to discuss ways to use the story sequence chart. A little bit harder than a variation where you change the characters and keep the plot is to keep the characters, but create a new problem. So now you have the continuing adventures of the hare and the tortoise. Now the tortoise is all cocky about having won the race, and the hare has to figure out a way to bring him down a notch. You see? Sometimes you can steal characters from one place and a problem from another and create something that's even more unique. I like the idea of a sequel because the characters are developed, and that's kind of the harder part for some people to think of developing characters, so you've already got some to work with. One thing I'd love to do, and this would be an off-checklist assignment, probably now we're getting into second or third year. Don't try this your first year unless you have very advanced students. But this is fun to do, a cross-genre assignment where you take a poem and you make it into a story. So you take a poem, write it into prose, or you could take a prose story and write it into a poem, right? Now, when you do that, you kind of go off checklist because you can't require all the style techniques in a poem. It would be a little bit constraining. Also, you can take a story and write it into a script, and that forces kids to study how do you say what you want to say, but you're limited to dialogue. So that's been a lot of fun to do, this story to poem, poem to story business. Another thing you could do is an expansion of the story sequence chart. If you have students who love to write stories and want to write longer stories, this is just not enough for them. Or if you're teaching older students and you want to kind of force them to write longer stories, I wouldn't, but you might, you can actually expand this. See, you could have one entire paragraph about the fox, his background, his personality, his history, his therapist, and the problems he's worked through. You could have another entire paragraph about the crow and how she got the cheese and how she just happened to be sitting on the branch at that period of time, right? So you could easily expand that to 2 or more paragraphs without much difficulty. Usually the problem of a story can be expanded a bit. A lot of times kids will put in obstacles. So you'll have one thing that you need to accomplish, and you'll have one little problem to solve, another little problem to solve, another little problem to solve in order to solve the big overarching problem. Lord of the Rings is like that. You have one problem. We got to get rid of this ring. And then lots of other problems like defecting wizards, Balrogs, getting lost, black riders, it just goes on and on. Right? So you can actually have them do sub-problems or obstacles. And then the climax resolution could easily be 2 or more paragraphs because you could do one paragraph just on the moment, kind of the slow motion picture. The crow opens her mouth, the squawk comes out, the cheese falls, horror enters her eyes as she realizes what has happened. The fox's open mouth is dripping with saliva, the glistening teeth ready to receive the prize, right? You could build that whole 2 seconds into an entire paragraph if you wanted to, you see? So you can easily expand the story sequence chart into more paragraphs. I would try to stick with the idea that each paragraph has kind of a purpose or a job. And if you want a little help with that idea, we have a book by Lee Roddy called How to Write a Story. And it really talks about expanding your stories into kind of full, fleshed out short story length with characters and development, theme, obstacles, that kind of thing. And then lastly on this list, you could make up a completely original story here, right? You would just use the chart and say, okay, I'm going to ask some questions, and then I'm going to find some answers in my brain and work with just that, right? So you say, okay, who's in the story? A frog. What's he like? Well, he's a hardworking frog, and he wants to take a vacation. He talks. Where does he go? Into the bank. Why? To get a loan. Who does he meet in the bank? The loan officer, Patricia Whack. What does he want? A loan. He says, Miss Whack, I would like to borrow $30,000, buy a boat, and take a vacation. What does she think or say or do? She says, you're a frog. He says, I know, but I know the bank manager, and Mick Jagger is my father. What does she say? Well, even if that was true, you would need collateral to borrow $30,000. Do you own anything? What does he do? He pulls out a tiny, intricately carved, microscopically detailed pink elephant and puts it on her table and says, this is worth $30,000. Now what does she do? Because she has a problem too. So she goes into the bank manager and she says, sir, I believe I have a frog in my office who says he knows you and wants to borrow $30,000 and use this for collateral. What is this? And the bank manager says, it's a knick-knack, paddywhack, give the frog alone. His old man is a rolling stone. You knew you were getting set up for that one, right? But the idea is you can even create a joke, if you have these elements. Does that all make sense? Okay, so please read through the content that we've provided for you in writing, the adjusting for grade level, answers to questions, the student samples, there's some sample outlines. All of that will benefit you. But what we're going to do here to finish up today is give you a chance to try this on your own in a practicum session, which begins on page 46. So, turn to page 46. The way this is going to work is it's going to be a group activity, and I'm going to read it through one time out loud, and then you will divide up into groups of 2 or 3 people. I recommend a partner or 3 people maximum. Once you get 4, you have a committee and nothing gets done. So, partner or 2, and your goal then is to ask questions and fill in the story sequence chart with the keywords that are the answers to the questions you ask each other, and kind of plot out this story of the Bat and the Nightingale in the story sequence chart. If you finish that before I call time, you can proceed to the column on the right and think of a few ly words that would fit, a few adjectives that would fit, maybe a few verbs that might come up, and use substitutes. Okay? I'll wander around the room and help anybody who's stuck or in trouble. But I think you'll find that if you talk to each other, this will be a little bit easier than just trying to sit there and do it on your own. So here we go. The Bat and the Nightingale. There once lived a bat on the banks of the River Lee. By day he hung tightly by his toes from the limb of a leafy tree. By night he patrolled the air on fluttering wings, feasting on mosquitoes. There lived too, in that same tree, by the same river, a nightingale. Like the bat, she slept away the harsh daylight hours, but by night she sang. She warbled with such beauty that the emperor and his royal court came nightly to the banks of the River Lee to listen. The sweetness of her song echoed in their hearts. Because of her remarkable talent, the nightingale grew vain and began to belittle her neighbor the bat. Aren't you ashamed of yourself, she said, flitting about, eating mosquitoes, singing not a note? What kind of life is that? In pursuit of a mosquito, the bat did not respond at once. He swooped, he swallowed, and only then did he reply, It's an important life. And he was off again, darting swiftly in the thickening dusk. Important? Cried the nightingale in disbelief. Look at my life. Why, I sing for the emperor himself. She preened her feathers proudly. What is catching mosquitoes to that? The bat flew by once more. If it were not for me, the emperor would never come to the river bank. What nonsense, scoffed the nightingale. He doesn't come because of you. He comes to listen to my music. The bat did not reply, but he smiled to himself. The next night he did not take to the air as usual. Instead, he watched from his perch in the tree as the nightingale began her evening serenade. Her song was more beautiful than it had ever been before. Wrapped up in the music of her own making, the nightingale did not notice that her royal audience was becoming restless, the emperor shifting uncomfortably from one foot to another. A horde of hungry mosquitoes was attacking the royal entourage, biting arms and ears and faces. The emperor and his court finally fled for the palace, tripping over their silken robes as they slapped wildly at the swarming insects. No one remained to hear the nightingale's lovely performance. The bird sat in silence for a very long while. "That, my friend, you two are right," she finally admitted. "You too have a valuable talent. It is true that only I can sing for the emperor, but it is also true that I can do it only with your help." So the two then worked in harmony. The nightingale sang while the bat caught mosquitoes, and the emperor and his royal court returned once more to the banks of the River Lee to listen to the heavenly melodies in comfort. Isn't that a nice story? Okay, so you're going to get together with a couple people, brainstorm the outline, and then we'll wrap it up for the day. Excellent. Well, do you see how it's kind of helpful to work with someone else, and you can kind of ask each other questions and answer each other's questions, and you of course don't have to all write down the same thing, but it promotes that kind of internal conversation to start with an external conversation. And if you can have students try this. I find some groups of students do very well when you put them in teams of 2 or 3, and others just don't. So you play that by ear. But I do want to send you off with the practicum homework. And that would be to write the story. Now you've got the outline. And so if you flip over to page 48, there's the practicum checklist. And you will note now that you are to do one of each of the 6 dress-ups, minimum, in each of the 3 paragraphs. So the checklist then has 3 columns, 1 for each. And I honestly think that if you will take the time tonight and just sit down and write this story, you will learn more than if I were to talk for another 2 hours. Why? Because you have to do it. Wrestle with the checklist, wrestle with the keyword outline you've got. If you're feeling creative or ambitious, maybe try a variation. You don't have to have a nightingale and a bat. Maybe you could have a concert pianist and a piano tuner. See, so you might look for some parallels. So if you're feeling a little bit creative or ambitious, see if you can do a variation. If not, you're just tired, you want to get to bed, but you do want to do your homework because it's the right thing to do, you can just retell the charming story of the bat and the nightingale. And if you're interested later on in becoming one of our accredited instructors, you do have to submit all the practicum assignments from this seminar. So if you do it now, you'll have it done, and that'll be good. What I would suspect will happen is you'll go home, you'll pull out your keyword outline, you'll pull out your LY word list, you'll pull out your checklist, and you'll spread yourself out on the table and you'll start writing a story, and one of your kids is going to come over and say, "What are you doing?" And you will say, "My homework." They'll say, "What homework?" They'll say, "I'm writing a story for my writing class." You're writing a story about what? What are you writing? Okay, if you want to sit here, you can sit here, but don't bother me. And what'll end up happening is they'll end up helping you accomplish the story. But it'll be a very interesting little lesson for them that this is important enough for you to do it and communicate them. Now, if your children are all gone, or you're too young, or you don't have any, maybe your spouse could assist. I don't know. But I do know that it's something to hear about it, something to see it, but to actually do it makes all the difference in the world. All right? So there's your charge, and we'll see you later tomorrow for Unit 4. Well, you're back. And you're alive. You made it through. I'm curious, of course, to know how many of you actually did the homework. Ah, look at that. Fantastic. I am so pleased. Congratulations. So I think it would be worth taking a little time to see what kind of observations you might have as a result of doing this last night. Do you have any comments or complaints or questions or anything you'd like to say about the experience? Because it's always good to do a little bit of a debrief. Anyone have any observations there? Yes. Libby.
I experienced empathy for my own students, the dog jumping on my lap while I'm trying to work, someone asking a question, the distractions, the hardship of that alone. I think I will return a more empathetic teacher.
Ah, very nice. Anyone else kind of have that feeling? Like, wow, this is taking a lot of concentration, and there's stuff in my world that I have to think about, and it's hard. It's hard to have attention split that way, and so realizing how important it is for students to have focus and time. How many of you found it took a little longer to do than you expected? Yes, I've had conversation with teachers, particularly when you're teaching in a classroom and you have a schedule and you've got to accomplish a certain amount each day or each week or each year. And the temptation is to think, well, we just don't have that much time to do this writing. But usually, I don't even have to counter back and ask the question. People ask the question themselves, is that appropriate? I mean, is it reasonable to say we don't have time to teach children how to write in school? It's a basic skill. It's fundamental to everything else. It's the way you will learn and communicate your whole life. So I would always say budget more time than you think you'll need, and the students will be less rushed, less anxious, probably produce a better result, but you will have to let something else go. And that's the problem. If you're doing one thing, you're not doing something else. So how to balance that out. But good. Yes, Janet.
You didn't ask the question, did you finish your homework? So I would like to know, how many of us attempted it but didn't finish it?
Okay.
Which my question is as an educator, as the teacher, when you get stuck, what do you do?
A couple thoughts on that, Janet. First of all, you will perhaps, the first time you teach through this material, feel a little unclear, a little fuzzy, like you really don't know what you're doing. And that's okay. It's new, it's natural. The good news is the system works. It is entirely possible for you to get a story and read it and put the story sequence chart on the board and just ask students questions and put their answers to their questions in the keywords. And you don't have to know ahead of time how it's going to come out. It will come out in the wash because the system works. So first point would be just trust the system and take the next step and fake it till you make it if you have to, right? Children are very resilient. Students generally have a little bit more willingness to just do something, whereas we get a little anxious about, oh no, we have to do it right. We're bound by the rules of logic, and children oftentimes aren't quite as careful in that way. So there'll be kind of a synergy that will happen if you trust the system. It's always good to do the assignment yourself. So if you're going to give children an assignment and you're not sure whether it's going to work or not, well, that would be a good sign. Try to do it and see how it comes out. And then you'll be more able to coach them if they get stuck. The third thing is if you're really stuck and you're just out there thinking, I just don't remember, or I watched the video again, it doesn't make sense, I'm just too fuzzy, well, call us, right? We have a forum, we have an 800 number, we have a whole network of people and resources designed to help you not get stuck. Does that kind of answer your question? All right, good. Yes, Thelma.
I would have to say I have a comment and then I have a question.
Okay.
And one of my comments is that I had a little trouble after doing my outline, staying committed to my outline because I wanted to change things along the way, but I still felt like, oh no, I've got to stick to what I originally put. Mm-hmm. So I ended up changing some things, but I was thankful that the structure itself was there.
Yes.
And then I felt comfortable going in and changing a little bit, and then I was a happier person to finish the assignment. But my question, actually, well, maybe it's another comment. I understand now why you say to give them one dress up at a time, because I found that as I was writing, I was like, oh no, I have to put that dress up in there. And, trying to put them all in at one time was kind of difficult, so.
Yes, and having 6 in all 3 paragraphs was kind of even worse than the infrasound, where you just had to do it one time.
Yes.
So I'm glad you learned that lesson again. Well, don't dump these things on the kids too fast. In terms of following the outline, that's a very good question. I tend to be very flexible with the kids, what they do with the outline, if they change things and elaborate or drop things off, particularly in the story writing, kind of in the creative fiction side. You might get an idea in the process of writing something and add a bunch in and run with it. That's great. That's great. Even in the nonfiction side, the reports, research, essay, I find that having flexibility to change things kind of on the fly generally brings better writing. So you think about it, if you have an outline, organizationally, that's a rough draft. Then when you go and write and you change things, well, then you've got one improvement, one revision happening already. I tend to be very flexible. Give me the outline, okay, you thought it through once, now you're going to think it through again on top of that, and it's going to be a better result. Is that helpful? So don't feel bad about changing anything. Did anyone have the experience of kind of looking at the checklist and saying, ooh, I've got to do this technique or that technique, put in this clause, and kind of saw that it caused them to be a little more creative than they might have otherwise been? Yeah, so having to think of, oh, I need to have an adjective somewhere, a good one, gets your mind thinking about better descriptions. Saying, ooh, I have to have this clause here, this when, while, where, as, since, if, although, kind of starts to get your mind thinking about more complex sentences and adding in more detail to go with the clause. So I find often that checklist, while it's a minimum of techniques, it gets their mind going, and they'll end up doing more techniques. Did anyone discover they did a bunch of techniques without even thinking about it? They just write the thing, oh, wow, I've got 4 out of the 6 dress-ups. I didn't even think about it. That's nice, too. And I will tell you this. If you will keep practicing, whenever you have a chance to write something, practice with the checklist, internalize it, make it a part of yourself, it gets easier and easier and easier and more natural. So, after I'd been at this about 5 years, I could just turn a switch and make all the techniques happen, or I could just not turn the switch and just write emailese and not think about it. So it does become more natural, less labored, and does, I think, continue to promote that creativity. Good. Anything else? Observation, comment? Yes?
Well, I just have a comment. Last night, upon returning to the hotel, I had a last-minute deadline I had to work on, as well as our homework. And I just really found, for me, it was very enjoyable to do the homework because it was almost like a game. Because and your checklist made it so easy for me to succinctly add my dress-ups in the limited amount of time that I had. And I was very pleased with the outcome. So I just wanted to say that I had a lot of fun creating my essay or story.
Great. Well, I'm glad to hear that, and that it was more a form of recreation than tedium. That's always good. But I think you have hit on that point I made yesterday, is that sometimes it becomes a game, and then people enjoy that part of the process, whereas they might not in their spare time say, oh, I think I'll write a story for fun. So, good. Any last one more? Chris?
I too enjoyed the assignment. It was very enjoyable. And I have a practical question.
Sure.
Because when I was going through it, I was following instructions and skipping lines and going back into my checklist and making sure I got everything right. And by the time I got to the end, I was very surprised at how messy and convoluted and very difficult to reread it was. I was wondering if you had any bright line suggestions or rules of thumb on how we as teachers can emphasize neatness or legibility to the assignments, and if you have any ideas of how strict we need to be on that with the students' writings.
Well, that's a good question. You perhaps have heard me tease the kids in the student workshop that I don't really care if it's neat, just don't go so fast or be so sloppy that you make the dreaded dad mistake. And you, being a dad of many, are super qualified to make the dad mistake, which is not being able to read what you wrote yourself. I don't really worry too much about the rough draft being legible as long as the student themselves can remember or figure out what they wrote. Because what's going to happen now is you're going to rewrite that or type it. And then when I look at it, I'll be able to read it much more easily. But in years of doing this, reading student papers with no erasing allowed, I've actually improved my skill at figuring out what kids are trying to say. And it's very rare that I get a paper I can't actually read. But what I said yesterday about don't pester them about being neat when what you want them to do is be thinking mostly about the words and the sentences and the logic and the language. So there's a balance there. But there is no such thing as a first and only copy of anything, right? A first and only draft. So you're going to go rewrite that, aren't you? Or type it up. And then what almost every student discovers, this is almost without exception, when I say to the kids, copy it over now, they almost always find more things to change. They find more improvements to make. They can notice things they didn't notice the first time around. And so almost always rewriting improves without you having to even tell them to do that. They just see things. So, and that's more true the older they get as well. So, did that answer that question? Okay, good. Let's move on and address the next element of the stylistic techniques, and that would be the sentence openers. So, turn in your binder to the tab near the back of stylistic techniques. You see the master list on page 171, and at a certain point, you will reach, the students will be able to do all 6 dress-ups, and it will be easy, right? If you followed the easy +1, you haven't introduced them too fast, and they can do an ly, a who, which, a strong verb, a quality adjective, a because, and a when, while, or as since, if, although, all in one paragraph, and it doesn't sound too goofy. Actually, I've met a few boys, the engineer types, who figure out how to do 5 of the 6 dress-ups in the first sentence, just to get it over with. But that generally goes away, and they start to realize this is no big deal, this is not tough, we do almost all these things without even trying anyway, and just check and have them there. And when all the dress-ups are relatively easy, then you can move on to the sentence openers. Now, the sentence openers, in my mind, are probably the most powerful thing for adults if you want to kind of instantly improve your writing. If you go to the library or bookstore and get a book on writing well, like Writing Well by Donald Hall, or Write to Learn by Zinsner, or Strunk and White, there's a whole bunch of books on how to write, right? And somewhere in all those books, they will say, vary your sentence patterns, right? So you say to your students, vary your sentence patterns. That makes better writing. And of course, the question is how. How to do that. There's a very old program out there called Power Writing that had, I believe, 30-some different sentence patterns that you had to memorize and imitate, and then the teacher would give an assignment. In this paragraph, use sentence pattern number 2, number 7, number 14, and number 22 or something. It was just way too complex. But it did help promote that idea of varying your sentence patterns. In Webster's system here, we do it with the opener, because that is the thing that is most likely to make the sentence seem different. Now, a lot of people, unless they try to do otherwise, will write like they talk, right? And when we talk, we generally tend to talk in a fairly predictable grammatical pattern, right? I went to a seminar on teaching writing. The teacher attempted to be funny, but rarely succeeded. We had to write many paragraphs and stories, which took a long time. It was well worth my time, right? You might write something like that, but what's the pattern? Subject, verb, object, subject, predicate, subject, predicate, subject, subject, subject. What happens when you read something like that is it has kind of a monotonous effect, a hypnotic effect, either drive you crazy or put you to sleep. Which is why, by the way, some of the worst written stuff you will ever find is in textbooks. Have you noticed this? I have read some textbooks, and just after the first couple paragraphs, I'm thinking, this could not possibly be as boring as it seems. Have you ever had that? So I always say, to students, well, read your textbooks, but don't write like them. How do the good authors write? Well, you can study them. You can study Dickens, Twain, Melville, Bronte. You can even study more modern authors. And what you'll find is they do use a variety of sentence patterns, and in that the openers is the most powerful way to address that. So you see the chart here, and the number 1, that's the one you don't really need to teach, because people do that one all the time anyway. So I actually don't teach that. When I get to sentence openers, I start with the number 2 and say, okay, now we're going to learn a prepositional sentence opener. When we do it in our paragraph, we're going to put a number 2 in the margin. And the way you do it is you use a preposition to start the sentence and say what you want to say. We find that some children know what prepositions are and some don't. It's kind of a slippery part of speech in the mind of many kids. It's not as concrete as nouns, verbs, adjectives, or adverbs. So it's very good to give them a list of prepositions. And I've given you a list here on page 180, so you can kind of have that handy in case you need a reference. There are perhaps a few more prepositions. A couple of them I left off because I don't like them. Words like but can function as a preposition, but are more often used as a coordinating conjunction, and most of the time don't make real good sentence openers. So this has been a list that served us well for many years. And what's nice is you can scan the list, see one of those words that might help you say what you want to say, and you can write what you want to write with a different sentence pattern. So let's do a little exercise where you can all kind of get a feeling for this. Grab a piece of scratch paper, and everybody write a sentence. Don't copy this one, write your own. A sentence that starts with the subject, has at least 6 words, and can be about anything you want. Anything you want. Your best friend, your worst enemy, aliens from the planet Zug, rainbows, butterflies, homework assignments, long seminars, Starbucks. Just write a sentence about anything. And put a number 1 next to it and label that a subject sentence. Tricia, what have you got?
The woman froze during the Texas Arctic front.
The woman froze during the Texas Arctic front. That could be a tongue twister. All right. Gayleen, what do you have?
The little girl hugged her white fluffy cat.
The little girl hugged her white fluffy cat. How sweet. Karen, what do you have?
Jack sat under the tree.
Okay. All right, so everyone got that? Now, what we want to illustrate with this exercise is how you can take any thought and put it into several different possible patterns. So, the next thing would be to take your first statement, whatever it was, the Texas Arctic front or Jack sitting under the tree, and try to re-say that same idea only with a preposition as the first word. Now, sometimes you can just flip a sentence. So if your sentence was, I will go to the mall after the seminar, you could just flip it and say, after the seminar, I'll go to the mall. That would work very nicely. Sometimes if you flip it, it sounds a little poetic or awkward, you know. Under the tree, Jack sat. That's kind of like over the river and through the woods to grandmother's house we go. You know, it works in a poem. If your sentence is very short, such as I eat ice cream every morning, you might have to add something to it, you know. In order to get fat, I eat ice cream every morning. Despite my doctor's warning, I eat ice cream every morning. Unlike my husband, I eat ice cream every morning, right? So go ahead then and say the same thing you said with the sentence opener 1, but now with a preposition as the second. Have you got yours, Tricia? Okay, go ahead and read it.
During the Texas Arctic front, the woman froze.
Okay, so that flipped very nicely. Pretty easily there. Gayleen, what have you got?
I just said, before breakfast, the little girl hugged her white fluffy
Okay, before breakfast. Karen?
After finishing his chores, Jack sat under the tree.
Okay, after finishing. Good. So you have that same basic fact, and it's a preposition. It's kind of funny. I will teach groups of kids, and a lot of times with moms in the room. And so I get to see the kids' faces, and I get to see the moms' faces, but the kids don't get to see the moms and vice versa. So I'll ask a question to a room of teenagers and say something like, does anybody know any prepositions? Right? And usually someone will kind of raise their hand and say, up, and then someone else will quickly volunteer, down. And then someone else will kind of in, and then someone else, of course, out. And of course all the moms are in the back of the room saying, then occasionally someone will volunteer the, and you know whose mom that was because she's... But once in a while, I meet a kid who knows a lot of prepositions. First time this happened to me, it was quite dramatic. A little girl in the back of the room, she was probably 13 or something. She starts spitting them out. About, above, according to, after, along, amidst, among, across. And I'm writing them down on the whiteboard as fast as I can go. I get to the bottom, I'm still on the A's. So I know something's up here. And I said to her, how many prepositions do you know? She said, all of them. I said, okay, well, for the rest of you who don't know all of them, here's a little list. And I hand out the list, and then they can scan the list, and they can use that list to help practice prepositional openers in the assignment. Well, this little girl came up to me after class. She said, oh, Mr. Pudawa, I'm so glad I came to your class today. And I was very impressed. I said, well, I'm glad you're glad. Why are you so glad? And she said, oh, you don't know. My dad made me memorize all those prepositions, and I've never known what to do with them. So that kind of experience of grammar information being somewhat irrelevant, but coming into practical application, it's so enjoyable, you know. Okay, so that would be the prepositional. Now, the number 3 opener here is going to be very easy to add to the list because the students are already well versed in using ly adverbs as dress-ups. But it does beg a question. If you use the ly word as the first word in the sentence to create the number 3 opener, does it also count for the dress-up? No. The answer is it does not. Now we're going to have 2 ly adverbs in each paragraph. Okay? And we're going to further refine the idea of the dress up so that it is going to be now this ly adverb dress up, okay, cannot be the first word in the sentence. It has to be anywhere else in the sentence, right? Because this ly adverb number 3 opener is the opener. Does that make sense? So if you're just learning the dress-ups and a student puts the ly word as the first in the sentence, unfortunately, blah, 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 that's fine. But once you teach this one, okay, then this one gets refined and has to be somewhere else in the sentence. The second word or in the middle or the end or wherever you want it to go. And it's a rare case where you where you have a paragraph that can't easily take 2 adverbs. One thing I would like to say kind of at this juncture in regards to style. There was an article published in a well-known national magazine some years ago that kind of directly criticized this checklist-based approach to teaching writing. Didn't name me or didn't name IEW, but the examples clearly were from our material. And the basic argument was, good writing is concise, it's not flowery, you don't just add in adverbs and adjectives to, make it more fluffy. Good writing would pare it down. And most of the books written about how to write well will push the idea that verbs are the key to good writing. Adjectives should be used sparingly, and adverbs should be used very sparingly because they're kind of dangerous. They can amplify a weak verb, but what you should really do is just make a strong verb instead of doing that. And so I could understand his logic because he's a journalist. So he has a journalist attitude about writing. But what I don't think he is a teacher of younger children, or a teacher of children at all, in terms of understanding that our job is not to carve children into little journalists. Our job is to build the linguistic marble. Our job is to get them to fall in love with words. And yes, there's a time and place for journalism, but think about it. Who wrote Alexander's Horrible, No Good, Awful, Terrible, Miserable Day? I mean, if you didn't have a bunch of adjectives, you wouldn't have that book, and it's a charming book, and I don't know if I got the title right, but you know what I'm talking about, right? So if you get a parent or a teacher or someone who says, but you see, you're telling kids to add in stuff that doesn't necessarily make it better, try and help them understand. We're building the linguistic marble from which someone else can carve a journalist, or carve a technical writer, or carve a poet, or carve a novelist, or carve a children's book writer, right? So I wrote back to this particular editor of this particular magazine a rebuttal, but he did not publish it, much to my disappointment. So all that to kind of say, don't be afraid to expand the checklist and require the kids to put in 2 ly words in a paragraph. They'll work on it, and gradually it will become more appropriate, more natural. And of course, the ultimate goal is that it's all so easy. You've got all that linguistic marble. They've built that ability to do it, and they graduate from the checklist. Do you remember that? It's an important idea to keep in mind as the ultimate goal, because this is intermediary steps. So go ahead now, if you haven't already, write your sentence a 3rd time using an ly adverb as the first word in the sentence. Galen, what do you have?
Tenderly, the little girl hugged her wife.
Tenderly, she did. Very nice choice. Good. Karen.
Finally finishing his chores, Jack sat under the tree.
Finally finishing the chores. Good. And Tricia?
Bravely, the woman froze during the Texas Arctic front. Sorry.
Bravely, she froze.
Yes, bravely she froze there.
Yeah, good. All right, excellent. Now, moving on. The number 4 is probably the trickiest for students because it is the least colloquial, the least likely to be used in spoken language. Therefore, it sounds the more literary. It sounds the more sophisticated. It is a number 4 ing opener, and there's a comma after that. So we put a comma on the reminder signs on the checklist so that when kids see that ing, okay, this is one of these cases where we know there's going to have to be a comma. Now, there's a couple potential pitfalls here. So before you write yours, let's do one together just so you can kind of see what the possible problems are. To do an ing opener, you have to start with a word that takes an ing. What part of speech takes an ing? A verb. So you have to start with a verb. So someone give me a verb, any verb. Run. Okay. All right. So run, we've got a verb. Now we stick an ing on it. Now we've got running. This is no longer a verb, it has become a verbal. It's just a weird grammar thing, but that's true. Now, as a verbal, it can do several things. It could become an adjective. It could become a noun. What we want it to be is a participle. So, we keep it there, and then we probably want to say how or where this running is happening. Running where? Down the hall? Okay. Running down the hall. Okay, now that's where we put the comma, and now we have the subject of the sentence. Who's running down the hall? John. Okay, now we need another verb, the main verb of the sentence. John tripped. We'll put slipped on a banana peel. Good enough? So, there we have a good and proper number 4 sentence opener because John is doing two things. He's running down the hall and he slipped, right? Studying till the wee hours of the morning, Karen passed her chemistry. Karen prepared for her chemistry exam, right? Eating ice cream every morning, Andrew gradually became too fat, right? So two things are happening. You see how that works? Now, two possible pitfalls, one bad, one not so bad. One possible pitfall would be if you had a sentence like this. Running down the hall, a banana peel caused John to slip and hurt himself. Now, that kind of makes sense, but technically there's a problem there. Does anyone see the problem? Yes. Yes. We have here the classic problem of the dangling participle or the misplaced modifier. I grew up in mortal fear of a dangling participle, knowing that you should never do a dangling participle. I had no idea what it was. I just know you should never do it. Now the grammar books will call it, I guess, misplaced modifier. I guess that will be infinitely more helpful to today's students. But the fact is pretty easy. And so the rule that I encourage you to teach kids, translate grammar stuff into words that make sense. So here's the rule that I set up. The thing after the comma must be the thing doing the inging. Say that with me. The thing after the comma must be the thing doing the inging. Now that's a rule that a 10-year-old can learn and use, right? And if the thing after the comma isn't the thing doing the inging, that's when you've got your problem. So is the banana peel running down the hall? Only if this is a VeggieTales segment, right? So that's one way to help kids, deal with this. And as I said, this number 4 opener is the least colloquial. We're least likely to use this grammatical construction when speaking to people, and therefore, when kids do it in their writing, it sounds more sophisticated. It carries quite a bit of power. Now, one other thing that can happen to kids when they do a number 4 opener is they get a sentence like this: running down the hall can be quite dangerous. Okay, now that looks like a number 4, but it's not quite the same. How do you know? Yeah, first clue is there's no comma, nor is there a place you could put a comma, right? The second clue would be, what is the subject of this sentence? Running, subject, can be verb. There's your sentence, right? Now, if you know the answer to this question, you win the Dusty Cobweb Grammar Award. What is it called when you take a verb, stick an ing on it, and use it like a noun? Jaron, yes! You win the Dusty Cobweb Grammar Award. You may go buy yourself a drink at Starbucks. You may buy yourself a drink at Starbucks. Now, this is not wrong. This is a grammatically valid sentence. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's not really a number 4. It's kind of an imposter. It looks like it, but it really should be marked a number 1. So you'll have this happen. Kids will start with a gerund like that, and they'll mark it a number 4. And I wouldn't stomp all over them initially. I might let it go for a while. But then, one day when you have nothing better to do, you can do a little lesson on true number 4s, participles, versus imposter number 4s, which would be the gerunds, right? And so you'll see that'll happen now and then too. So go ahead and write your number 4 sentence for yourself if you haven't already, and we'll see what you get. I was on an airplane a year or so ago, and I was sitting next to a full colonel in full uniform. Big, tall, very distinguished African-American man. And we talked a little bit, and he kind of found out, what I do. And then we stopped talking, and we just, I was reading, and about halfway through the flight, he said, excuse me, but could I ask you a question? I said, yes, sir. And he said, I've always been curious, maybe you could explain it. What is a dangling participle? One of those, bugaboos from childhood that stick with you your whole life. So I pulled out a piece of paper, I gave him a little lesson on number 4 openers. He goes, oh, that makes perfect sense. So, all right, Tricia, read yours first.
Dashing to her car, Mary escaped the bitterly cold rain.
Okay, dashing to her car, she escaped the Arctic front in Texas. I like that. Karen.
Hoping to avoid Dad's notice, Jack snoozed under the tree.
Hoping to avoid Dad's notice. Very good. Kayleen.
Purring loudly, the little girl's cat rested in her lap.
Purring very loudly. Good. All right. Now, I have to show this to you right now because it's in the context of this type of opener. But your first lesson for students on the number 4 opener should probably kind of stop right there, work with that for a while. But if you flip over to page 182, you will see a little discussion of, on 181, is the illegal or the dangling participle. Then you see the gerund opener. And then we have another little category of opener that fits in here, but it's a little less obvious. And this happened because I had a student who was with me a few years. He was a very fine student. And he had written a sentence something like this. Black and blue from the ordeal. The aged boxer finally retired. Something like that from the ring. I don't remember exactly. It was kind of like that. And this student came to me and said, Mr. Boudoir, what kind of sentence is this? I don't know, because you always say if you don't know what it is, call it a one. One subject / catch-all category. But I know the subject is the aged boxer, so what is it? Because we don't have a category for adjective opener. And I thought the last thing we want to do is create a category for adjective opener. That could be a big mess. So I looked at it for a while, and I came to realize there is a missing word here. What word could you add right there that wouldn't change the meaning or the structure of the sentence at all? Being, or having become, a variant of the be verb. And what we discover is that in English as well as Latin and many other languages, I would presume, we can drop the be verbs and still retain the meaning. And so, in a way, it's a little more elegant, right? So, if the word were being, then that would be a number 4 opener. However, it's not there, which is why we call this an invisible number 4 opener. Does that sound kind of romantic? An invisible number 4. It's there, but you can't see it. So if you take a look on those two samples, page 182, you'll notice that this particular construction can work with either an adjective, being furry and small, mice make excellent pets, furry and small, mice make pets, or it could be with a past tense verb. Lined with cedar shavings, a glass aquarium makes an excellent home for rodents, right? Exhausted by the long seminar, comma, I collapsed into my easy chair, right? Exhausted, being exhausted, do you see? And so it shows then how participles really are verbal adjectives. They connect with a descriptive power, right? I, in a condition of being exhausted, right, is modifying the noun, or the pronoun in that case. So you can probably try that out a little bit yourself. In fact, everybody try one right now. Try and make yourself a sentence that has an invisible number 4 opener. If you can stick with your theme, stay with the same one. If you can't, just write any old sentence you can think of. And it can start either with an adjective, or it could start with a past tense verb functioning as an adjective. Joanne, what'd you get?
Excited by writing, the student loved class.
Okay, excited by writing, comma, the student loved class. Being excited by the writing, excellent. Right, Gene, what do you have?
Embarrassed to admit I've never visited Texas before, I am happy to be here.
Okay, very nice. Embarrassed to admit I've never visited Texas before, I am happy to be here. You are embarrassed and you are happy. Beautiful. Sam, what did you get?
Built with powerful legs, the dog jumped over the ditch.
Very nice. Built with powerful legs, the dog jumped. So it was being built and it was jumped. So see how that works? So that might come up, and I thought I would just mention that now. But be careful you kind of introduce this idea in stages, right? Stage 1, basic idea. Start a sentence with an ing word, right? That's the opener. Next idea, refine the imposter versus the real one, the participle versus the gerund. And if the kids are old enough, you can use those grammar words. And then at some point, it's nice to show the option for the past tense verb or the adjective, the invisible number 4, and we mark that all in the same category now. So that includes all of those, number 4. All right, now number 5 opener is going to be easy again. So I like the way this is set up. You get something a little new, something pretty easy you've been doing, something very new, now something you're used to. So kind of not like it's always getting harder and more complex. This is a clausal opener. It's using that same set of words. Do you remember what that stands for? When, while, where, as, since, if, although. And there are a few others. Now, this is going to be similar to the ly opener where we refine the idea of the dress-up. Until you teach the number 5 opener, this clausal dress-up can go anywhere. When you teach the number 5 opener, now we make a rule about the clausal dress-up that this cannot be the first word. Okay? So, until here, this can go anywhere. But once you've done this, now we say you're going to have 2 adverb clauses. One of them is going to be the first thing in the sentence, and another one of them is going to be elsewhere in the sentence. And again, this is a case where a lot of sentences can be flipped, right? So sometimes flipping it doesn't change the meaning too much. After I finish breakfast, I will read Dante, right? I will read Dante after I finish breakfast. That doesn't really change the meaning. Sometimes when you flip it, it could change the meaning. Although the seminar was long, I learned a lot. I learned a lot, although the seminar was long. There's a slightly different nuance there. Sometimes you can't flip it, but it's good to show kids how you can flip sentences with phrases and clauses like that. So if they need the opener for the checklist, put it first. If they need the clausal dress-up, try to flip it, put it last. Now, this is a point where I break with my mentor, Webster. Because when you get to this point, your sentence, your paragraphs are pretty packed. Look at what you've got going. Adjective clause, adverb clause, a because clause, which is another form of adverb clause, prepositional phrase, participle, another clause. You're getting some pretty heavy-duty weight here. So this is where I say, okay, let's give a little bit. Let's let some slack, right? And I then remove the because clause from the dress-up checklist. And I say, okay, once you've learned these sentence openers, 2, 3, 4, 5, you do not have to do the because clause anymore. You can do it if you wish, and if you do it, it will count as the clausal opener. When, while, where, as, since, if, although, because. And then at some point I like to show the kids there's a few more words like whereas, unless. You can kind of add to the list once they're really solid on those 7. So then what happens is you've got 4 sentence openers, and now you